Thank you. So we are really delighted today to welcome Dr. Emily Roberts to speak with us and to perform a Q&A with us on personal finance. She specializes as a personal finance educator in early career PhDs and has a business that she set up called Personal Finance for PhDs, where she equips graduate students and postdocs as well as early career researchers to make the most of their money. And she's been doing this through her capacity and background with a PhD in biomedical engineering from Duke University. And so we're really quite thrilled to be hearing from her. For folks who registered and are joining us today, many of you had questions that you've submitted. So we've gone through and compiled those questions into a succinct list. And without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. So Emily, the first question, and this is a really broad question, but we wanted to just get an idea of what day-to-day money mistakes do you see people commonly making through your experiences?
Yeah, that was a great question. Actually, if you don't mind, I'm going to take a minute to kind of give my context
Please.
first so that people know how to interpret my answers. So I have been a financial educator since I finished my PhD about 10 years ago. I live in the US. I am a US citizen. I work in the US. I work with universities in the US. So I'm definitely going to have a US slant on all these answers, especially when it comes to subjects like taxes and investing, which we'll get to. Common mistakes, maybe that's, more universal. So I just want you to know where I'm coming from. So if you want to follow up with a slant on the question like, oh, Emily, you didn't answer that from an international perspective, or Emily, oh, you answered for a US citizen or resident, but you didn't answer for an international, person in the US. We can make all those adjustments, but just know that I might slip into that bias because that is what I do on the day-to-day basis. Okay, what common day-to-day money mistakes? I thought of three that I think are pretty important. I think the first one I'll start with is when setting up your life, setting up your budget if you keep one. I think that all too often people don't reflect on what's really important to them and what they really want to be spending their money on before they engage in the act of spending money. And I really sympathize, especially with graduate students and postdocs, people who live on a limited income, which is generally who I speak to, because it can feel like you really have a lack of agency when you don't have a high income or even an income that's sufficient for what you really want to do. But especially when you're using limited resources, it's even more important to be reflecting on what's actually important to you. Because I could name things that would be mistakes in my life because they're not important to me, but that doesn't mean they're not important to you. So maybe that wouldn't be a mistake in your context. So I do think it's important, especially the lower your income is, setting up a budget, which helps you be intentional about what you want to spend your money on. A budget is not just about, oh, I have to live a constrained life in this category. It's about, here are the resources I have to allocate, and this is what's important to me over here. This is not so important to me over here. I'm going to allocate my resources in a way that's going to make me feel like I'm fulfilling my own values. Okay, so that's the first reflection. The second kind of money mistake that I think that people make sort of stems from that, which is not automating as much as they could be. So I'm a huge fan of automation in finances because I'm a forgetful person. And so I would like forget to, make that transfer that I intended to, or I might forget to pay a bill, which obviously can have big impacts on your finances. So I automate as much as I possibly can. And I really highly recommend it, especially for busy people. You got a lot more important things to be thinking about than your credit card bill. Just automate everything that you can. Of course, you need to make sure that your checking account is going to be big enough to cover bills and stuff that's automated you might not see and be examining too closely. So keeping an extra little buffer in your checking account when something slips by you, that's a really great idea. But I definitely suggest automation to the greatest degree. As a subset of that, there's a principle, super classic personal finance advice, which is to pay yourself first. And so what that means is that you put reaching your own financial goals, whatever they may be, before all the other people who have their hand in your pocket. Okay. So the government does this, right? If you're an employee, the federal, state governments, they're going to take their little tax piece out of your paychecks before you even see them. You need to do that same thing to yourself. So if you have a savings goal, an investing goal, a debt repayment goal, whatever it is, I really highly suggest paying yourself first, which means, okay, I get paid on the 31st or the last day of every month. The first is the day my rent comes out. The first is also the day that my savings goals come out of my checking account. So before everybody else gets paid, pay yourself. That's a subset of the automate everything you can principle, because I don't want you to forget to fail to follow through on your own goals. And there's something kind of almost magical that happens with cash flow, which is that if you leave savings to the last thing you do every single month, there's never money left for savings. But if you do it first, somehow it works out most of the time. Okay, so that's the second principle. The third one is that, and again, really sympathize with people who are living on a constrained income for this one, but people generally spend a lot, like way too high of a percentage of their money on their large fixed expenses. Housing, transportation being the main two in that category, childcare, if you have children who need childcare. If you are spending 60, 70, 80, 90% of your after tax income on expenses like that, you are going to feel like you're broke. You are going to feel so constrained. And sometimes we don't have a choice about this. You're living in absolutely the uh, cheapest housing you could possibly find in your city. Sometimes we've already made all the sacrifices, and then it's, well, okay, let's look at the income side of the equation. But if there's any way that you can rearrange your housing, rearrange your transportation, to be less than what they are now, that's going to help you be able to reach your goals, be able to feel more like you have a lot more agency over your money. You're going to feel a lot better about it if you have 60, 50, or less percentage going towards those large fixed expenses and your overall sort of necessary expenses also. And when people are thinking like, oh, I'm in a crisis with my budget, like my credit card bills are mounting, things are not adding up month to month, I'm always in the red, they tend to look towards short-term immediate
Mhm.
fixes, like I need to stop eating out, I need to stop going to the bar, I need to stop buying clothes, I need to, like, those sort of immediate things you can turn off spending on because they're consumption related, variable consumption related. But going after your housing expense instead, it can take months, it can take money to do that. I totally understand that it takes time, but that's really where the big win is in terms of freeing up cash flow. Okay, those are three day-to-day money mistakes. They're not even really day-to-day. They're just like things that affect your day-to-day.
Right.
Yes. Okay. We'll leave it there.
Okay, so you already touched on kind of our next question is talking about simplifying our money management. As especially early career professionals, we're all very busy and we're not thinking every day about our finances, and that's not a healthy way to think about your finances every day. So you've touched on it already with the automation, but what are the things that you would highly recommend we do to simplify our money management and to make it as streamlined and as effort-free as possible?
Okay, I'm going to say something that sounds a little like I'm giving you the opposite goal, which is I think more accounts, maybe have more accounts. Because a lot of people who I speak to, they, for instance, have one checking account and all of their cash flow in and out on a monthly basis is going through there, but also their emergency fund, also their savings for other types of goals. It's all mixed in the same account. And that can work for some people if you're organized about it separately. Like if you have a separate spreadsheet that tells you this is the money for ongoing expenses, this is the money for emergencies. Okay, I can't do that. I've experimented with this. So what I really encourage people to do is actually have a more complicated, in a sense, account structure, but it helps your checking account stay a lot more simple and your credit card bills and so forth, which is to say, open up a separate savings account that is just for your emergency fund. And again, speaking from a US perspective, in the current climate, everybody needs an emergency fund and everybody needs a decently sized emergency fund because we do not know what is happening with everybody's income. So have that separate emergency fund. And that also helps you when you make a goal of building an emergency fund because you can see, oh, every month I'm transferring $50 in. It's growing. Instead of just being in your checking account, it's like, I don't know what the balance is. I don't know what's happening here. Again, have separate savings accounts for either like one general savings account that you can dip into when needed or that has a certain purpose or maybe multiple different purposes to it. So something that I really benefited from when I was in graduate school, especially in dealing with that constrained lower income, is creating what I call a system of targeted savings accounts. So it would be like, okay, I have a different saving account and there's different purposes for it. So, for example, I pay my car insurance once every 6 months. So I need a separate savings account that's going to help me build up towards that eventual payment. And paying it once every 6 months is like a frugal thing because I get a discount, but you have to have the structure there to back it up, right? So every month I'm saving a little bit of money towards that every 6 months car insurance bill, and then multiply that across all the areas of your finances. Doesn't have to just be bills. It could be goals you have, like when I was in graduate school in my mid 20s, all my friends were getting married and they live all over the place. So I wanted to travel and participate in those events. So I really had to have a separate savings account that would help me make those decisions. That's where I think this becomes more simple or more easy on your mind, is that having your money separated into different purposes like this helps you make those decisions around, can I afford to do this thing? Like I remember I was invited to a wedding. I was living in North Carolina. The wedding was in Chicago. And I was looking at that balance in my like travel savings account. Like, okay, I can say yes to this wedding, but I can't fly there. I have to road trip there. And so I could see how much money I had available to spend. And that, not having to redo those decisions on a weekly, monthly kind of basis because you have everything separated and like everything has a purpose, I think it eases the mind a lot, which to me is simpler, right? Even though it's more complex in terms of the account structure, you've made your decision making simpler. Um, okay, that's one answer to that question.
That's awesome. Is there anything else that you would recommend for
I
simplifying and
think just
automating?
automation. Yeah, I'll just go
Okay.
back to that. Mhm.
Okay. And then I see that Caitlin has a follow-up question. Do you mean traditional savings accounts through a bank that we use for checking, or should we consider high yield savings accounts?
Definitely high yield. Yeah. 10 years ago, there was very little distinction between a checking account, a savings account where, you do your checking and everything, and a high yield savings account. Now there's a decent distinction. So absolutely something like your emergency fund, put it in high yield savings. I would say I have many opinions on banking, but why are you working with a bank that doesn't give you high yield savings? I mean, maybe there's a reason, maybe there's a good reason for it, but I would be definitely willing to open new savings accounts and maybe even move my whole checking situation over to a different bank that offers high yield savings. Because if you have your checking account and your high yield savings at different institutions, it'll take a couple days to do the transfer. That's manageable, but it's even better if they're the same institution and the transfers are instantaneous. So for sure, high yield savings, and worth changing banks over, I think. As long, you have to look at the benefits you get from your current situation, but if they're not adding up, then definitely be willing to switch.
Okay. Um, so then thank you so much for answering that question. We're gonna talk a little bit, because you've spoken now about that investing in yourself. We're gonna talk a little bit about some beginner-friendly investment strategies and how we can start investing potentially on limited budgets. So very, very broadly, what are some beginner-friendly investment strategies that you recommend people start with?
Okay, so there are a couple different takes on this because beginner can mean inexperienced or not knowledgeable. And I can answer that. And then beginner can also mean maybe you're only working with a small stream of savings, or maybe you can't even save on an ongoing basis, but you have like a lump sum from the past that you have available to you. So remind me if I don't answer from those two different
Okay, thank you.
perspectives. Beginner friendly. Um, your choice of brokerage firm, which is where your investments are going to be housed, is really important. So when I teach investing, I teach what's called passive investing, which is investing in index funds and funds that track indices, which just means that your money is broadly diversified across dozens and hundreds of different individual assets, and that the choices of what assets are included in the fund is a very objective choice. Like this fund is supposed to represent the entire stock market. It's not some active fund manager is picking various different stocks using their own intuition or knowledge or research or whatever. No, it's we just buy everything. That's very simple and that's very beginner friendly. And honestly, that's friendly to everybody. That's just not a beginner strategy. That's an everyone strategy, in my opinion, passive investing. So that means buying index funds and things similar, ETFs that exchange traded funds that track indices, for example. Um, so your choice of brokerage firm is going to help you with, are they more pushing you towards that passive strategy, or are they pushing you more towards an active strategy, which is definitely not for beginners, and I think not for anyone if you really want to make money in an easy way, or at all. So your choice of brokerage firm. So the online discount brokerage firms like Vanguard, Fidelity, Charles Schwab. A lot of people I found work with these institutions more than I imagined actually when I started teaching this. Often because like they had an old employer with Fidelity, and so it's easy for them to make another account with Fidelity. Those kinds of brokerage firms are great. I work with them myself. But for a beginner friendly option within them, I would say look at for retirement investing, target date retirement funds, which just means that you're looking at, okay, what year would I think I'm retiring at? When am I going to be 65 or 70 or 50 or whatever year you think you're going to retire? And choosing a fund that's oriented towards that year, bucket of years for retirement. And that fund, it's actually a fund of funds. It will be appropriately invested for your timeline between now and that retirement date. And over time, as you get closer to that retirement date, it will shift. So this is a really hands-off strategy. I use it myself, even though I'm very knowledgeable in this area. I find it to be so simple and so easy and so automated, and I love all of that. So choosing like a target date type retirement fund is a great choice for a beginner or for anybody, really. So that's like helping you get started without having to have a ton of knowledge. Although if you want to feel more knowledgeable in this area, I highly recommend the book A Simple Path to Wealth by J.L. Collins, which talks about passive investing strategies. Okay, so online discount brokerage firms like the ones I mentioned, that's a great strategy. Another great one is robo-advisors, which have, kind of come up in the last like 15 years with financial technology companies. So this is things like Wealthfront, Betterment, Ellevest, these kinds of companies. And they will also similarly almost always be investing you in index funds, but they're going to be giving you a little bit more guidance in the selection. Like you'll answer some questions about your goals and so forth, and they'll give you, okay, this is your investment allocation we recommend. Not that different from target date retirement accounts, by the way, if your goal is retirement. So you can go with that. They're a little bit more expensive slightly, but not super significantly. So if it makes you feel comfortable to get that kind of like algorithmic help with investing, that's a great option too. In terms of investing with very little money, that's something you have to do as like a secondary selection factor on these brokerage firms. So I made a mistake when I first started investing, which is that I didn't realize that I was investing into my individual retirement arrangement, IRA, my Roth IRA, it was Fidelity. I set this up. I think it was $200 per month going, that was 10% of my income going into that account. And what I didn't realize is that Fidelity wasn't actually investing the money that I was putting in. It was being contributed to the IRA, but it was staying in cash in the money market. And I didn't figure this out for over a year because I didn't know that much and I wasn't really paying that much attention. I bring this up because I think what actually was going on is that I had not yet contributed enough money. I believe the minimum was $3,000 for Fidelity to invest my money in one of their mutual funds, which is what I wanted. And so you have to be very careful when you're only investing from the beginning, like from a zero balance with a small savings rate, like I had, $200 per month. You have to be very careful that that brokerage firm that you choose is actually going to be working with your account in an appropriate way. So some of these funds, maybe like a target date fund, they might have like a minimum of like $3,000. And maybe that's not what you're starting with. So you need to start with a firm that's going to work with you from the first dollar. And maybe that means a place that sells fractional exchange traded funds. So you can say, I want to contribute $50 per month and I'm going to buy whatever fraction of an ETF I can with that money. So it's just another sort of layer you need to put on your decision-making process to make sure that they're going to serve you from that first dollar, which you absolutely can find this solution. It's just, you have to look a little bit and use that filtering.
Um, I that's awesome. A lot of what you just said I had never heard before. So that's really great. And I hope that was a really helpful answer for everyone on the call. Kind of building on that is how do we, I guess, start, like, how do we choose what amount? And I know you spoke at the beginning, about, contribute to your savings at the start of the month. But is there a way for us, especially when we're paying off debt, potentially from the other degrees that we've earned, to start balancing that, how much should we be putting in versus how much should we be paying off our debts?
Yes. I need a whole workshop to answer this question.
Okay.
So I'll tell you more about the workshops that I give maybe towards the end of the
Yeah.
call. But I have a whole framework that I teach that helps you make that decision of, I have a limited income as a graduate student, postdoc, someone starting out in their career, and I want to work towards some financial goals, but what's the best thing? Is it debt? Is it investing? Is it building my emergency fund? What do I do? I can only save $50 per month or whatever it is. So I have a whole workshop that helps you make that decision. So I can run you through the beginning of that framework in a few minutes. The first step is the emergency fund. So if you don't have, I would say at this moment, 3 months of expenses in an emergency fund, that needs to be your number one goal, bar none, because we are in such an uncertain environment. Second goal would be to pay off what I call high priority debt. It does not include student loans. Well, maybe private student loans if they're at a high interest rate, but not federal student loans. Again, US perspective. Um, it's things like credit cards, things at a very high interest rate. I would say maybe above 8%-ish interest rate. Definitely want to address that in step 2 of this framework. Even IRS debt, I encourage you to get rid of as a high priority debt. A lot of PhDs in the US, again, especially end up with IRS debt because of fellowships and we didn't know anything was being withheld, blah, blah, blah. So get rid of the IRS debt. Step 3 in my framework is to prepare for the irregular expenses that I mentioned earlier. So things coming up in about the next 12 months, you can see coming on the horizon that if you were just suddenly presented with that bill or presented with that expense in a given month, you wouldn't be able to pay for it because it overwhelms your available cash flow in a given month. So start preparing for things like trips you want to take, or like large bills you need to pay once per year, or like an upcoming move, or even like an upcoming conference where you have to front the money. Having a separate savings account that's just for that kind of cash flow is really helpful too. So thinking about those irregular expenses over the next 12 months and starting to prepare for them, either knowing that you can pay for them in a given month when they come, or starting to save and plan in advance for those expenses. So that's step 3. Step 4 is when we get to investing. And I think I'll stop after step 4. So we've taken care of like our credit card debt. We're prepared cash wise for things that are, going to be thrown at us. Step 4 is when I think you can start to invest for retirement. And that's really the top, like first goal that people generally should be investing for, because it is a long time away, but time is very powerful when it comes to building your investments. And it's a very, very large goal to be able to provide for yourself in your elder years. So starting to invest for retirement would be step 4. What I teach in this framework is to use 10% of your gross income as a goal if you're starting in your 20s. If you're starting in your 30s, 15% would be that goal, and starting in your 40s would be 20% as the goal. I know not everyone's going to be able to save that much money right off the bat, and maybe it even has to wait. Maybe during graduate school you can save 2% of your income. Hey, that's amazing that you started that habit, you've set up the systems, you've worked on your mindset, you've learned. That's amazing. Maybe the 10% has to wait until you're in your next career stage. That's okay. But holding out 10% or 15 or 20 as the goal to work towards is what I suggest in step 4. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I have so I'll ask a follow-up question on that. So and this is again a US based question because I am a graduate worker in the US. So a lot of students in graduate programs do not have retirement contributions through their workplace. That's not a benefit that graduate students necessarily will have. Same thing can happen for postdocs. And so if you don't have retirement benefits eligibility through your university or your workplace, you've already mentioned IRA. So what are some of the ways that we can be contributing to retirement without that through our workplace?
Mm-hmm. Number one, just double check what is available to you. So I've noticed that even graduate students at large public institutions like the University of California, they often actually do have access to the university's 403B, which is like the nonprofit version of like a 401k. So just check. I haven't seen it at private universities. I definitely haven't seen it at smaller places. Just check. And as you said, for postdocs, same kind of issue. If you're a postdoc employee, you almost certainly have retirement benefits like a 403B or a 457. If you're a non-employee, probably not. Almost certain. I mean, some postdocs I've noticed are split. They have some employee income, some non-employee income. Anyway, if you're purely a non-employee, you won't have those benefits. But just check, okay? Because it is really easy to do it through your workplace in comparison. Not assuming none of that's available. I already mentioned the individual retirement arrangement. Typically Roth, but traditional also is an option if you think it's better for you. That is available through these kind of brokerage firms I just mentioned, the robo-advisors, the online discount brokerage firms. Lots and lots of places will offer an IRA, although it is, of course, worth checking to make sure if that's what you want to use. The IRA has a contribution limit annually for people under age 50. In 2025, it's $7,000 per year. So it's relatively small compared to a 401k or 403b, but that is sufficient for a lot of people starting out early in their careers. So I definitely think if your goal is retirement, an IRA makes a ton of sense. We can talk about eligibility if you want, but maybe I'll leave that there. If you do happen to max out your IRA, $7,000 per year, and you still want to invest more and you don't have those benefits you have access to, it's worth considering. Are you self-employed? Because if you're self-employed, you can set up self-employment type retirement accounts through your workplace that you've created through your own business. Assuming you're not self-employed, then we're just looking at a taxable brokerage account, which is like a regular, normal brokerage account, no particular tax advantages associated with it, but something that everybody offers. So, same place you open up your IRA, you can just do a regular taxable brokerage account. And as long as you're investing in a passive way, as I mentioned earlier, you're not doing a ton of churn within that account. Yes, there might be some small tax implications, but they should be pretty minor in these early years, especially. So, don't worry too much about not having the tax advantage if you've already maxed out what's available to you.
Okay. And then kind of on that note too, a lot of people, and especially the PhD students on the call, express this feeling of I'm behind already by still being a student. And so what are the things that you recommend PhD students do to feel like they are catching up and they are actively contributing? And I know you've sort of touched on this throughout some of your answers already.
Yeah. First of all, a lot of people are behind. I mean, who defines what's behind, right? Like a lot of people don't start investing for retirement until their 50s or their 40s. Like it's a thing that a lot of people put off. And so you might feel behind if your peers have jobs in the private sector and they've had company matches since age 22 or whatever. That's certainly possible. But a lot of people are not being very proactive about this. So anyway, anything you can do is great, especially in your 20s and 30s. Okay, how can you feel like you're doing something? If you do have some kind of savings rate available to you, run through that framework that I was talking about earlier. Hopefully, you can get to the investing stage, but don't skip out. When I was a graduate student, I hadn't learned as much as I know now, and I didn't have my own framework, right? So, like, I skipped that emergency fund. Thankfully, I didn't have credit card debt, but I skipped out on like my auto loan debt, which was kind of a high interest rate. And I just wanted to get to investing because I was so excited about it. I still am excited about it. But in hindsight, I should have built up that emergency fund first. So run through these things. I think the important thing, especially early on, is developing the habits, the mindsets, the ground base of knowledge, setting up the accounts that you need. Don't worry as much about, okay, I'm only saving X dollars per month, or I can't even save every month. Maybe it's just something I can do a couple times a year. Don't worry about that so much because if you take the time now to be, again, learning, setting up the accounts, setting up the systems, setting up, I have a savings rate in my budget, even if it's 1%, I have a savings rate. Once you move to those later career stages and your income goes up, it's so much easier to just increase what you're already doing rather than to learn everything fresh, right? When you have a lot of other stuff going on in your life too. So take the time now. Know that it's valuable to be working and learning about your finances, even if the dollars don't reflect that as much. You can still make great use of this time. And hey, if you do have a savings rate, then yes, of course, like it's very beneficial to be using it towards the types of goals that we've been talking about. I definitely don't want to discourage you from being, energetic about that, but I also just don't want anyone to feel guilty or behind or anything because you're already doing a lot for your career, of course, and also your future finances by investing in your education. And that's going to be really, really valuable in the future as well. So just to remind yourself, it's not always about the dollars you have right now. It's also about your future earning potential.
It's so nice to hear that. And then one of the things that you said just now actually transitions us perfectly to the next question we had, which is that, as we move along our career path, we start to have more benefits that we might be able to take advantage of, and also higher percentages that they might be useful for. So, what are, as people go along their career path, transitioning from grad student to postdoc to researcher, professor, going into private industry, what are the benefits they should be looking for in their jobs, they should be asking HR about and taking advantage of?
Oh my goodness. There are so many, and it's such a varied landscape in the US, obviously, because a lot of our benefits come through employers instead of through the state. Um, I want to do a plug for my podcast because, okay, so my podcast is called Personal Finance for PhDs, same name as my business. And I'm actually preparing an episode right now about, not necessarily benefits, but like resources that may be available to you through your university or your job in the future that are maybe under recognized. And so, for example, one of the answers I got, I'm going to a few conferences this year. So this is a question I'm asking people I meet at these conferences. What resource would you point to on your campus or your job or whatever? So something people pointed out was like employee resource centers. I can't remember the acronym, but it's like maybe there's legal services that are available to you for free through your employer. This happens at universities as well as other types of workplaces. They can help you end a dispute with your landlord or, things like that. So there may be hidden, not very widely understood benefits. So when you do HR onboarding at whatever jobs you take, like, thank you so much for that link. When you do that onboarding, make sure just to say, hey, I have no idea what the benefits here might be. Just throw everything at me because I'm new to this kind of environment. But the really common ones, of course, are health insurance, again, US context. And so figuring out, is it the best? Are you going to get the care that you need? And also, is that a reasonable price point for you on the plan offered by your work versus maybe your spouse versus maybe your parent, depending on how young you are? Comparing all those options and making sure that you are going to get the great care that you need, but at something that's going to be affordable for you. So health insurance, major one. Retirement stuff we've already brought up, but like if there's a match that's coming from your employer, and that can start as early as the postdoc level, know all the details about that. So I didn't mention this in the framework, but the secret step 1B in my framework is to start contributing to your employer retirement account if there's a match available right after that emergency fund is built. So build the emergency fund. Let's put a hold on even the credit card debt. Oh my gosh, it's hard for me to say it, but like that match is so valuable. It's maybe 100% match, maybe a 50% match on up to a certain, amount of your income. Maybe it's 3%, maybe it's 5% of your gross income going into that account. Get that employer match because that is literally part of your compensation package that you are leaving on the table if you don't contribute enough to get it. Some places it's not a match, but your employer will just contribute to your account. That's something to know. Sometimes there's a vesting schedule. I've seen this with postdocs sometimes, like, oh, you have to be here for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years to get to walk away from the job with all the money your employer has contributed, but you'll still walk away with a certain percentage of it, just depending on how long you've been there. So knowing those details to help you make those decisions. Other benefits less well known, student loan repayment could be offered by some workplaces. And so, of course, knowing those details, knowing how to apply, how likely it is that you're going to get the grant or whatever it is, like employers can help with that as well. Okay, those are some common ones. Did I answer your
Um,
question fully?
yes, and you actually let in, it's great. You keep leading into like the next question we have. So a lot of the time, these take time, right? And so for especially early career researchers, we have moderately temporary positions, right? A postdoc may be there for a year, 2 years, 3 years. We all know grad school ends at some point. And then, especially when you're early career, you might be transitioning a lot. So do you have advice for people who are moving careers or are in relatively temporary positions?
Hmm. I will go back to the mention of the emergency fund because if the funding ends, like you got to find something else, and you need to tide yourself over. Even keeping a moving fund set aside. Now, hopefully, later employers will pay for your moves, but it might be retroactive. So again, having that money available up front, very good for you. Let's see. We talked about banking and accounts and stuff earlier. So in case it wasn't obvious already, I use an internet only bank for my checking and savings. And having like a non brick and mortar bank is a lot more flexible. So like not having to switch from like a regional bank to another regional bank, just having either a national bank or an internet only bank is just one less thing to worry about when you're transitory. I definitely thought about that when I, moved from undergrad to my postbac fellowship to grad school to, the first city after grad school, the second city after grad school, the third city after grad school. I just found that to be really helpful not to have to kind of update those things. Now that I feel more stable, I'm like, oh, let's look into credit unions. Like I want to be invested in my community. But before then, it wasn't as feasible. Okay, so moving funds, keeping your banking in a way that's flexible. Let's see. Something else to think about. I think this question might be about home ownership because that's something that a lot of people feel they can't access when they only have kind of a ticking clock on how long they're going to be in that city. And again, I really felt that way during graduate school. By circumstance, you mentioned that I went to Duke, Durham. It's the cost of living has increased, but it was pretty moderate cost of living at the time that I was there. And between me and my husband's also a PhD. We got married during graduate school. Between the two stipends, we could have afforded a small house after we got married. And it was just kind of like, well, we're already 2, 3 years into these degrees. We really only have 2, 3, 4 years left. Maybe, there's this rule of thumb about owning a home for 5 years. So that really deterred us. And again, hindsight looking back at that, we ended up living in Durham for 5 more years after we got married. So sometimes the timelines are longer than you think they're going to be. And maybe homeownership was actually a reasonable step for us to take at that point. It's kind of a regret of mine that I didn't buy at that point. So I don't want you to let this ticking clock necessarily shut you out of home ownership if it's something that is financially feasible for you. Obviously, a lot of markets, it's not feasible, depending on your income and so forth. But if it is feasible for you, think about the clock, but don't let it be the entire determiner because you don't have to sell a home just because you move away from the city. You can keep it and rent it, or you could sell it if it makes financial sense for you. I actually have interviewed several people on my podcast who owned homes during graduate school and then continued to own them for a few more years afterwards. Eventually, maybe they got rid of them, but they waited for the right time to sell, and the right time did not necessarily correspond with when they left the city. So if you do pursue home ownership, you have to think about your exit strategy. Is this a home that I would be able to easily sell because we're in a college town and there's always demand here, or be able to easily rent out? Again, same kind of circumstances. Um, is it not something that's so unique and specific to your needs that it wouldn't appeal to other people? So don't let the ticking clock alone tell you can't purchase a home. Really think through all the possible exit strategies for that scenario. If you do end up leaving, or maybe like me, you'll stay longer than you expected to.
So with that, we got two questions in the chat from Lauren, and I'm going to ask the second one first, which is when you're moving from institution to institution, do you recommend rolling over your previous retirement account into your current retirement account or keeping them separate? Are there perks, disadvantages, totally up to the user? What do you recommend?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So the general best practice in this area is when you leave an employer to roll that prior retirement account, as the questioner said, either into the next employer's retirement account or even better practice into your own IRA, Roth or traditional, depending on the type of account it's rolling from. So, and that's just because it becomes like a lot of paperwork and upkeep to keep up with, half a dozen different, past employers' retirement accounts. So, yes, the best practice is to roll it probably to your own IRA. If you have really great investment options at your new workplace and they allow the incoming money, not everybody would allow it, then rolling into the new workplace could be a good option as well. But if you have not very good options in your workplace retirement account, definitely go to your own IRA. I've run my business more or less since I finished graduate school, but my husband's employed by a biotech startup. And because as a startup, they had really terrible retirement options at the beginning. Thankfully, they've grown and improved those over time. But for many years, and what I mean by bad is expensive, very, very expensive retirement account options. So we definitely didn't roll anything into that plan and avoided using it to the extent that we could. So be a little critical, look at the options, but yes, definitely be rolling somewhere.
Okay, so then I think, again, perfectly transitions us to Lauren's other question. There are a ton of banks, and all of the banks want your business, and so they're all going to tell you why they're the best. So, are there any particular banks? This isn't necessarily an endorsement from you, but are there any banks that you would recommend us looking into as we're getting started that are user friendly with high yield savings accounts and easy to track IRAs?
Yes. So one resource that you can use to compare banks are websites like bankrate.com, nerdwallet.com. What you have to be careful of when you look at places like that is that they're getting some kind of commission for listing something as number one instead of number five or whatever. So you have to be a little bit of a savvy consumer when you're comparing these things. I will tell you the banks that I've used, I have good personal experiences with. So I currently bank with Ally Bank. And in the past, I banked with Capital One 360, and they both offered checking and high yield savings, multiple savings accounts. Ally does, and I'm sure other banks do too, but Ally does this bucketing thing. So within one savings account within the bank, you can delineate up to 10 different like sub buckets. Very helpful for things like targeted savings, like I talked about earlier. That's just my personal use. What I would recommend that you are careful about, because in the phrasing of this question, user friendly, is there an app? Sometimes really, really good solid banks or financial institutions are, 10, 20 years in behind in the user experience. So if that is absolutely the most important thing to you, look for it. But what I want to caution you about is there's one of the more recent trends in financial technology has been, I think they're called like virtual banks. It's like an interface that you work with that you think is a bank, but it's not actually a bank. There's like another bank that's underlying the like overlaying bank. And they offer really great perks that are attractive, especially to younger people, the great apps and so forth. But what you have to be very careful about is, am I I would prefer that you work directly with a bank and not work with these like virtual banks, because there's been some problems in litigation recently about money being frozen and lost, and in the communication between the face that you're dealing with and the actual underlying bank, there's been some issues with that. So I would not recommend using one of these virtual type banks, but just going with an actual direct bank that you're banking with. And of course, you can select based on whatever's important to you. Maybe it's the ATM network that they use, or maybe it's the app, or maybe it's, I don't know, speed or interest rate or whatever is important to you. So be really cautious about that.
Um, Thank you. Yeah, I remember hearing this past summer some horror stories about some of those third party groups. And Freya just said in the chat that she uses moneysavingexpert.com. She's located in the UK, so that might be a good place, especially if you're not based in the US, to look through your banks. We have two questions about taxes and then two more general questions. So hopefully we'll get through those. Our first question is a very broad question, as they all start out, which is, what are the most common tax mistakes that you see PhDs and postdocs making, especially, here in the US, but if you can speak more broadly to the international community?
The tax one is where I really cannot. I've got
Okay.
to stay US specific in this because that is where my expertise is, and I'm so sorry. It seems like everybody else has easier taxes than we do. I don't know. Okay, in the US, the main problem that graduate students and postdocs come across is that their income is not documented in a way that they would expect it to be. So some people receive W-2s because they are employees, especially at the postdoc level. That's really simple. If you're a 100% employee as a postdoc, your taxes are like normal, like everybody else. You're good. You can use TurboTax. That's fine. Um, if your income is not strictly W-2, or if you're a graduate student whose funding is not showing up on your W-2, which it probably wouldn't, then things get more complicated. So yeah, the main thing is the documentation is not, there's not one universal standard that all the universities and all the funding agencies and so forth follow. So the W-2 is pretty cut and dried, but there's going to be other money elsewhere that's not documented. So it could come on, I'm talking about fellowships, generally fellowships and training grants. Scholarships, it could come on the 1090T if your university has processed it, which is helpful, but not all universities use it, and it's not required that they give you one in these circumstances. It could come on a Form 1099 miscellaneous, a Form 1099 NEC. Those are both official tax forms that if you start entering those into software and they don't know that you're talking about fellowship scholarship income, it's going to get real confused. It's going to think that you're self-employed. You're not self-employed. Don't pay those massive self-employment taxes. Or it could come on like a courtesy letter, which is not a tax form. It's just like a letter that's like, hey, we gave you this much money this year. Do with that what you will. Or there could be no documentation. So because of this varied landscape, people do get really confused. So the main mistake is not understanding and accounting for all of the income you've actually received, especially the scholarship type, fellowship type income, because the documentation can be non-existent or varied. So that's the main thing. And then at the graduate student level, I'll have to add in, there's a benefit that virtually all funded graduate students use, whether they know it or not, which is called tax-free scholarships and fellowships, which just means that if you have scholarship, fellowship type income that goes towards paying a qualified education expense under that particular definition, something like tuition, that scholarship, fellowship income is not subject to income tax, which is great. So the scholarship you get that pays your tuition directly that scholarship is not taxable to you. But what people sometimes miss is that maybe there are some qualified education expenses that are not documented on the Form 1090-T or not run through the student account. And so you can actually overpay your tax by not accounting for these other sources of, essentially they're kind of like deductions, not accounting for those. So income can be confusing. You might not be maximizing all of your deductions depending on how they're documented. Those are the main problems that I see.
And so then with that, especially because you've touched on that challenge that comes from fellowships, how do you recommend PhD students handle their taxes when they're on fellowships? What's like the best, easiest way that they can do that?
The software recommendation I would give you is Free Tax USA. Oh, I forgot to mention one other problem. Some of you are screaming in your heads at me because I did not mention the lack of income tax withholding
Mhm.
on fellowship type income. So most universities don't withhold income tax on fellowship type income at the grad student and at the postdoc level. And so a lot of people are caught off guard that first tax season after they start that type of funding because they have this massive tax bill and they don't know why. They don't, anyway, it's a big issue. Okay, so software recommendation is Free Tax USA. Secondary recommendation is work with me because I offer products in this area. So I maybe didn't get into this much earlier, but I'm a financial educator. I work with universities, so I provide tax education to universities and also to individuals. So I'd be happy to put some links in the chat if you want more information about that. But I basically offer either live seminars or pre-recorded educational workshops on helping people understand, like I was just mentioning, all the different various ways your income might be documented, or all the different ways, all the different places you should check to see if you had a qualified education expense. Software will prompt you on that to a degree, but I think that my work is a little bit more thorough because I'm so focused on this population. So you can also work with me on this. And beyond that, how should you handle it? Use software. Augment that with your own really deep understanding of your situation and pay your estimated tax if you are required to pay estimated tax.
Um, awesome. Thank you so much. We have two questions left that we're going to rattle through real fast in the remaining time. So if you had like three small changes you could tell people to make to benefit them the most in the long term, what would those three things be? I imagine you've already said them throughout the hour.
I think so. The pay yourself first thing combined with the automation thing, absolutely. Um, being, again, I said it first, being intentional about how you use your money. So this is not specific to graduate students and PhDs, but a lot of people, I would imagine all over the world, kind of spend what's available to them, and aren't really thinking deeply or critically about how much money do I actually need or want to spend versus saving or doing debt repayment, something else with it. They kind of just spend everything that's available to them. And your employer or your university, whoever's funding you, did not magically come up with a number that is exactly the right number for your lifestyle. So chances are you could spend less on your lifestyle and save something, or you should be spending more on your lifestyle and you should be working on increasing your income in the meantime, like having a side hustle or something. That magical number was not tailored for you. It's just a number. Um, and let's see, your question was
Three things. So you've given us two so far.
three things, but to what end?
Three things, three small changes people could make to benefit them the most in the long term. So pay yourself first,
Mm-hmm.
really evaluate where you're spending your money. And then if you had one third thing, what would it be?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this may be kind of a subset of the other two, but your spending, the way you allocate your money at all times in your life should include, well, of course, taxes. Okay. Also a savings rate going towards some kind of financial goal. Also spending on your necessities, also spending on discretionary expenses. It is not reasonable for anybody to be spending strictly on necessary expenses and depriving themselves of everything that brings you joy in life beyond your basic need for survival. Okay. So those three elements of saving, necessary spending, and discretionary spending should always be present in your cash flow management. Even if you think that you can't save, maybe you really can't on your income, then that means earn more money, whether that's immediately with a side hustle or like, I'm going to hustle and get to graduation and like move on from this career path because you deserve to have financial security, which comes from savings. You deserve to have, of course, your basic needs met, and you deserve to have some joys that come from spending money in your life as well.
Awesome. That's such a wonderful thing to hear. I want to just let you know that Caitlin in the chat said that she's been using your tax cheat sheet and some of your other resources, and it saved her a lot of time and I assume money on her taxes. And then Maliha asked a follow-up question on whether or not your cheat sheet includes info for non-resident or international scholars in the US.
So that particular cheat sheet doesn't. I haven't created that particular resource for non-residents, but I do have a workshop for non-residents. These are sometimes sponsored by universities, so definitely check if your university offers it. But I can also put it in the chat where you can buy it if you want to for individuals. And so that particular workshop divides people into citizens and residents and non-residents, and then within the citizen resident side between grad students versus postdocs versus postbacks. So if you're still struggling with your taxes and we only have less than a week left, maybe jump in there.
Awesome. Thank you. And then my last question, I want to be mindful of everybody's time, but if you could point us towards your favorite blog post or podcast, the one that you're like, you should listen to this to learn the most. I'm really excited for the podcast. You said it's coming out soon. But if you have one that you're like, everyone on this call should go check this out.
Okay. Yes. So this episode that I'm putting in the chat expands on this idea of irregular expenses and targeted savings because cross borders, I think that this is an issue for a lot of people's budgets, especially on a lower income. I've already mentioned why, but if you want more details about how to implement that kind of system and some questions and exercises to help you set it up, that would be a place to go.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you coming and giving us your time today. This was really, really informative. And I think that especially the members on the call got a lot out of it. The members who will watch this back later, I think we'll also learn quite a bit from you. So we really appreciate that.
Yes. Can I do one more plug for my
Please,
services?
please.
Yes. So I mentioned earlier, I'm a financial educator. I work with universities in the US and also other kinds of groups who serve graduate students and postdocs and PhDs to provide financial education. So mostly what I do is I'm a professional public speaker. So I give workshops, I give seminars on tons of different topics. Many of the ones we really did today are sort of in my core teaching. So if you found this valuable, I would really appreciate you, one, joining my mailing list, which you can do through some of the links I've already put in, and then also recommending me to your institution. And usually the types of people that hire me are people who work in professional development. So that could be at the graduate, like at your graduate school, maybe it's a medical school if you're on the, the biomed side of things. But an administrator who provides professional development or a student group that provides professional development, but they have to have a budget. So yeah, that's the kind of people that I work with. And I would really appreciate recommendation because that's how I get most of the clients that I do. And then you can help your peers too, and we can have more time together.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. This was really helpful.
Yes, you're very welcome. This is fun.